Candace Owens tried to control the narrative until Jasmine Crockett brought the receipts, held her ground, and dropped a line that silenced the room. The lights were hot. The makeup artist had already done her rounds. Producers signaled silently behind the cameras. And there they sat. 4 chairs, 3 panelists, and 1 moderator trying to look relaxed. Jasmine Crockett shifted slightly in her seat, not from nerves, but precision. Her blazer was a deep cobalt, the kind of blue that made you listen. Across from her sat Candace Owens, legs crossed, smile sharp, eyes watching. They were on Real America Now, a late evening segment on WJTX out of Phoenix. Known for its sharp political segments, the show had a reputation for being anything but friendly. You didn't come here to find middle ground, you came to plant a flag. The topic was supposed to be a familiar one. Race in America, criminal justice, party politics, nothing new on the surface. But everyone knew that when Candace Owens was in the room, it wasn't about the topic, it was about control. Congresswoman Crockett, the moderator began, you've been vocal about disparities in our justice system. But many, like Candace here, argue that the system works, and that race is used too often as a scapegoat. Your thoughts? Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't even shift. Her voice came out level, low. Well, the problem isn't that race is used too often. The problem is that it's ignored until it costs someone their life. Candace smiled, tight, performative. She jumped in. With respect, Congresswoman, I think it's dangerous when politicians push victimhood. This idea that everything bad that happens to Black Americans is rooted in racism. It's dishonest. I'm living proof. A few heads nodded off camera. That's how it always started. Candace framed herself as the exception, then tried to erase the rule. But Jasmine wasn't here to be steamrolled. So, Jasmine leaned forward just slightly, you believe systemic racism is exaggerated? Candace's smile didn't falter. Absolutely. The numbers don't lie. We've got more Black millionaires than ever. The biggest stars, the most powerful voices in entertainment and culture, they're not just Black, they're celebrated. What we're seeing now is victimhood as currency. The moderator glanced at Jasmine. She didn't speak right away. Silence was part of her style. She waited until the air in the room felt slightly off, like something had shifted that no one else noticed yet. She turned back toward Candace. That's an interesting stance, Jasmine said, because I was reading a public record last night that says otherwise, from 2007, I believe, a discrimination complaint filed by you. A pause. Not dramatic, just direct. Candace blinked. Excuse me, she said, laughing. I don't know what you're talking about. Jasmine kept her eyes on her. She reached into the side pocket of her binder and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Filed with the Stanford Board of Education, Jasmine continued. You claimed you were the victim of racial harassment in high school, and you didn't just file it. You won a settlement. Am I wrong? Candace opened her mouth. No words came. The moderator leaned forward, visibly uncomfortable. Let's just keep things respectful, Jasmine cut in, her voice still calm. This is respectful. I'm not attacking anyone. I'm asking how someone can spend years telling Black kids that racism isn't real, when she herself once needed protection from it. The room was different now. The camera guys felt it. The producers felt it. Viewers at home weren't flipping channels anymore. Candace shifted in her seat. Her jaw clenched for just a second, enough for anyone paying close attention. That's ancient history, she finally said. It was a different time. I was a kid. But you were telling the truth, weren't you? Jasmine asked, softer now. Silence again. Yes, I was. But that's not the point. It is the point, Jasmine interrupted, because the truth doesn't expire. But Jasmine had only just started pulling the thread, and Candace had no idea how much was still attached. The silence on set dragged for a second too long. Candace adjusted the microphone clipped to her lapel, not because it needed adjusting, but because it gave her a second to think. Her smile, always part of the performance, wavered. This wasn't the setup she expected. I think we're losing the thread here, she said, trying to regain her balance. Bringing up something from when I was a teenager doesn't discredit the broader conversation about how race is weaponized in politics today. Jasmine didn't flinch. Actually, it's exactly the thread. You say systemic racism is exaggerated, that people cry racism to avoid accountability. But when you were on the receiving end, it was real enough to go to court, and real enough for them to pay out. Candace opened her mouth, ready with a retort, but Jasmine leaned in, cool and quiet. You said you were harassed with racial threats, that the school didn't protect you, that you feared for your safety, and you weren't wrong. But let's be honest, you didn't overcome racism by denying it. You got justice by calling it out. A low murmur swept through the live audience, barely audible, but present. Now, the moderator was stuck. He looked at the producers off camera, then tried to move things along. Okay, maybe let's keep this about current policy, Congresswoman. Jasmine didn't let him. We're talking about current policy because of past patterns. We can't talk about justice if we keep pretending the past didn't happen. That includes her past. Candace exhaled, sharp, like air being forced out. You don't know me. I know your words. That's enough. Candace straightened up, louder now. You're twisting things. People grow. My views have evolved. I've learned that too many people lean on victimhood to make a living, and it holds the whole community back. But you didn't grow past it, Jasmine countered. You grew from it. You used that experience to build something. And now, instead of helping other young people stand up when they're being targeted, you're out here saying they're imagining things. That landed. You could feel it. Not just in the room, but through every screen watching at home. Candace shook her head, laughing again, but this time there was no real smile behind it. You're trying to frame me as a hypocrite because I don't walk around angry about what happened to me? No, Jasmine said calmly. I'm showing people that your story isn't what you claim it is. That you benefited from the very system you now say doesn't exist. There was a pause. Then Jasmine turned to the audience, addressing the cameras directly. Here's the reality. Racism didn't end because Candace Owens became successful. And pretending it did doesn't help the people who are still trying to graduate without being profiled, or apply for jobs without changing their name on the resume, or survive a traffic stop. One of the panelists, a former state senator from Arizona, cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe we should move the conversation toward solutions. But the spotlight wasn't moving, not yet. Candace tried once more. You think you're helping people by making them feel like victims. I'm helping them take power. Jasmine's voice didn't rise. She didn't need to yell. No, you're helping people forget what it took to get that power. You're helping them forget that the fight didn't end with you getting a platform. You tell them to stop complaining, but you filed a complaint. And you were right to. You were right. But you forgot what it felt like the second you got a microphone. The moderator tried to cut to commercial, but the delay in his voice said everything. He knew this was the moment people would be talking about. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not until she held the contradiction up so clearly, the audience couldn't look away. Candace Owens had built a reputation on control. Her interviews were usually tight, forceful. She didn't flinch, didn't stumble. That was her brand, being the one woman in the room who always had the answer. But tonight, the rhythm was off. Jasmine Crockett wasn't trying to shout her down. She wasn't mocking, or baiting, or turning it into theater. She was just standing on solid ground and pointing out that Candace wasn't. Candace reached for a stat she'd memorized 100 times. Black Americans make up only 13% of the population, but commit over 50% of violent crimes. That's not a feeling. That's FBI data. Jasmine's head turned slowly toward her, and this time she let a little steel into her tone. Are you seriously doing that right now? Throwing out cherry-picked crime data like it's gospel? It's not cherry-picked. It's real. And it doesn't account for how those numbers are gathered, Jasmine replied. Policing isn't neutral. Surveillance isn't neutral. You know how many crimes don't get counted when they happen in wealthier white suburbs because they're handled quietly? But every incident in a poor black neighborhood gets logged, arrested, processed. You know that. You've read the same reports I have. Candace's voice sharpened. You can't excuse violence just because of the zip code it happens in. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. No one's excusing anything. I'm saying the system doesn't observe everyone the same way. And you of all people should know that. You lived it when you were 17. For the first time in the segment, Candace looked visibly unsure of what to say. She glanced toward the moderator again. He looked back at her, but didn't rescue her, so she changed tactics. You know what's exhausting? Candace asked. Being told I'm not black enough or that I'm a traitor because I don't walk around blaming everything on racism. Jasmine cut in immediately. No one's calling you a traitor. I'm calling you dishonest. There's a difference. Candace sat back, crossed her arms. You don't think people have the right to think differently? Sure, they do, Jasmine replied. But when you stand on a national platform and use your own story to erase the pain of millions of others, it's not just thinking differently, it's selling people a lie with your name on it. Candace scoffed. I'm not selling anything. You're on book tours, podcasts, paid speaking gigs. You're selling a brand, and that brand requires you to pretend you never filed that complaint, that you never needed help, that you were never hurt. Candace's jaw worked. Her foot tapped. The camera caught it. The moderator finally leaned in. Let's pivot slightly. No, Jasmine said flatly. Let's finish this point because this matters. The room quieted again. The air wasn't tense. It was alert. Every time you tell a young black kid that they're making excuses, Jasmine said, you're ignoring the fact that you once needed someone to believe you, to take your fear seriously, to act on your behalf. And now you tell people that doing that is weak. Candace didn't answer. I'm not here to win a debate, Jasmine continued. I'm here because too many people watching this don't have anyone speaking directly to their experience. And I'm not going to let someone erase that just because it makes for a catchy headline. There was a pause. You could feel everyone on set holding their breath, unsure of what was about to happen next. Then Candace broke the silence, not with an argument, but a deflection. Well, she said, at least I don't cry on cue and ask for sympathy. That did it. Jasmine laughed, not mockingly, not cruelly, but the kind of laugh you let out when someone reveals they've run out of anything real to say. I never asked for sympathy, Jasmine said, just accountability. But if that's too heavy for you, I can carry it alone. But Candace didn't realize Jasmine had one more card to play, and it was the one she couldn't walk away from. Candace tried to shift the tone. She straightened in her chair, smoothed her skirt, and turned toward the camera like she was back on familiar ground. I think we're watching performance politics in real time, she said. Congresswoman Crockett is clearly more interested in being viral than being honest. Jasmine's hands rested lightly in her lap. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She just looked at Candace like she was watching someone try to mop a floor while the sink was still running. You keep saying I'm performing, she replied, but all I've done tonight is ask questions you're afraid to answer. No spin, no slogans, just facts. Candace gave a half laugh, dismissive. The fact is, people like you need racism to keep your careers going. Jasmine didn't even turn toward her. She looked straight at the moderator, then to the audience. Let me be clear, she said, voice low but carrying. I didn't get elected by telling people they were victims. I got elected by telling them they deserved better, and by fighting like hell to make sure they got it. Candace cut in louder. No, you got elected by selling fear and division, just like the rest of them. And that's when it came, the moment. Jasmine looked at her, not angry, not smug, just steady. You can't rewrite history just because the cameras are on. That sentence hung there like a foghorn in a silent harbor. Everyone heard it. Everyone paused. Even the camera seemed to hesitate. Candace's mouth opened, then shut. For once, she didn't have a retort ready. Jasmine leaned forward just slightly, keeping her tone even. You filed that complaint because you were scared, because you were young and black and targeted, and it was real. Your experience mattered then, and it still does now. But what you're doing, pretending it never happened, pretending you never needed help, it's not strength. It's survival, dressed up as denial. Candace tried to pivot. So now I'm not allowed to change my perspective? Of course you can change, Jasmine said, but don't gaslight the very people who are walking the road you once cried for help on. The moderator was quiet now. The other panelists were quiet. One reached for his water bottle slowly, like the sound of it might snap the tension. Candace broke the silence again, but this time her voice was just a notch higher. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of betraying my community. Jasmine raised her eyebrows slightly. I didn't accuse you of anything. I reminded you. That's what accountability looks like. Candace shifted, then laughed again, this time more defensive. You know, I've sat across from a lot of people who try to make me feel small. You're not the first. Jasmine's reply was quiet. I'm not trying to make you feel small. I'm trying to remind you you're bigger than this. That line didn't hit like a punch. It hit like a mirror. Because for a moment, you could see it in Candace's face, a flicker, like something cracked through the armor. And Jasmine didn't press further. She let it sit. The moderator finally cleared his throat. We're going to head to a break shortly, but before we do, Jasmine said, her voice rising just slightly for the first time all night, I want to say something to the folks watching at home. She turned to the camera, not to the room, to the people sitting in kitchens, living rooms, break rooms across the country. If you've ever been made to feel like your experience doesn't count, if someone told you you were imagining what they didn't want to deal with, don't let them erase you. Don't let them polish over the truth just because it's hard to look at. You matter, even when the people with microphones pretend you don't. And she paused there, gave it a beat. But while viewers were catching their breath, Candace was scrambling to find hers, and the next few minutes would only make it worse. By the time the segment went to commercial, the internet was already on fire. Clips from the exchange flooded timelines before the credits rolled. Someone in the control room had leaked a raw angle. No edits, no cuts. Just Jasmine Crockett, calmly holding her ground while Candace Owens stumbled through the pushback. The quote was already everywhere. You can't rewrite history just because the cameras are on. It landed like thunder, memes, GIFs, hashtags. Even accounts that usually stayed neutral started posting screenshots and short clips. There was no spin that could clean it up in time. Backstage, Candace paced the hallway in heels that suddenly felt too tight. Her assistant hovered behind her, phone in hand, whispering updates she didn't ask for. Trending on X, top 5 nationally. Over 4 million views already on just one clip, the assistant muttered. Candace didn't respond. She was too busy trying to reframe the moment in her head, trying to figure out where the control had slipped, and how Jasmine had managed to keep hers. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat calmly in the green room. She wasn't scrolling. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, but she left it untouched. She had nothing to explain. She hadn't come for a fight. She'd come to tell the truth, and the country had listened. Within an hour, political analysts were chiming in. One known centrist anchor from a Florida radio station said, I don't care where you stand politically. Jasmine Crockett did what we ask every elected official to do. She showed up informed and unshakable. Another tweeted, Candace Owens met someone tonight who refused to play her game, and it shows. But the real power wasn't in the pundit reactions. It was in the everyday people, the teachers, the barbers, the students, the parents, who flooded comment sections. I've watched Candace Owens for years. That's the first time I've seen her truly rattled. Jasmine Crockett didn't yell, didn't insult, didn't deflect. She just laid the truth in front of her and let us all see who squirmed. She said what we've been waiting for someone to say on national television for so long. There was empathy too, though not for Candace. Viewers remembered that racial complaint Jasmine had referenced. Some pulled up archived local news stories from Connecticut. Others found old interviews, court documents, even public records. The dots connected. Candace had once asked for protection. Now she was branding that same fear as weakness. The pressure was building. Later that night, Candace released a statement on her social media platforms. It read, in part, I will never apologize for evolving and encouraging others to take personal responsibility. Yes, I experienced racism in my youth, and I overcame it, not by wallowing in it, but by refusing to let it define me. Some people can't stand that kind of strength. But the comments didn't fall in line like they used to. Thousands pushed back. Evolving doesn't mean erasing. Overcoming it doesn't give you the right to deny it exists. You can't hide behind growth when you're out here denying the path you took. And underneath all that, Jasmine finally posted something of her own. It wasn't long. It didn't even mention Candace by name. Truth doesn't need a headline. It just needs someone willing to hold it steady. 4 hours after the segment aired, Jasmine's clip had over 15 million views across all platforms combined. Even people who hadn't seen the show were now quoting her. Back on set, producers shook their heads in quiet awe. I knew it was going to blow up, one said, but I didn't think it would land like that. The host, sitting behind his desk reviewing the footage, looked up and said what a lot of people were already thinking. Candace brought the volume, but Jasmine brought the receipts. But it wasn't just a media moment. It was something deeper. And by morning, people were asking why it hit so hard. By morning, this wasn't just a clip. It was a moment. One that hit people differently depending on where they sat in the world, politically, socially, personally. But no matter the angle, one thing was clear. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just exposed Candace Owens. She had exposed something bigger. In coffee shops across Philadelphia, Detroit, Oakland, and Birmingham, people were still talking about it. The debate had spilled past the screen and into real life. One woman at a bus stop in Tulsa said to her coworker, "She wasn't even mad. That's what made it hit harder. She didn't yell. She just held her ground like she'd done it before." Because she had. For a lot of people watching, Jasmine wasn't just debating. She was living what too many had lived themselves, being told something didn't happen, even while it was happening. Being told to move on when the scar was still fresh. Being told they were imagining patterns everyone else had already learned to ignore. And Jasmine didn't come to talk circles around anyone. She came to put the truth on the table and leave it there, no matter how uncomfortable it made someone feel. Back in D.C., members of the House were taking notice too. Some of her colleagues called, others sent quiet messages. One staffer from a neighboring district said, "Jasmine didn't just win the debate. She showed what accountability with grace looks like. That's rare." But it was more than rare. It was overdue. So often, political TV debates turn into shouting matches, where whoever talks louder or interrupts faster is crowned the winner. But Jasmine did the opposite. She slowed it down, made the room quiet enough for the truth to echo. A young black woman in San Jose posted a video talking through the moment. She was sitting in her car, eyes wet, voice steady. "I've watched Candace for years and felt sick every time she said people like me were just playing the race card. But hearing Jasmine bring up that old case, that same experience Candace tried to bury, man, it felt like finally somebody said it plain. We're not crazy. We're not imagining it. And we're not alone." That was what mattered. It wasn't about humiliation. Jasmine wasn't trying to destroy someone. She was trying to remind everyone that erasing the past doesn't heal it. And that silence doesn't mean peace. It just means someone stopped listening. The story hit especially hard for people working in classrooms, courthouses, and clinics. People who see the pattern up close, where names on resumes get overlooked, where voices in meetings get talked over, where consequences depend on who's watching. A middle school teacher in Little Rock wrote in her journal that night, "My students ask all the time if racism is still real. I used to dance around the answer. Today, I'll show them the clip." It mattered because Jasmine wasn't there to prove herself. She didn't need to. She was there to stand still while someone else danced around the truth and eventually stumbled over it. The lesson wasn't about sides. It wasn't left or right, Democrat or Republican. It was simpler than that. If you live through something painful and then deny it later just to score points, you're not strong. You're pretending, and people can tell the difference. Candace had power, sure, a platform, millions of followers, but what Jasmine had that night was credibility, and that doesn't come from followers. It comes from consistency, from matching your past to your present without pretending the in-between never happened. And that's why it hit hard, because people didn't see a takedown. They saw someone finally saying what needed to be said, without flinching, without shouting, and without turning it into a spectacle. But there was still one question left hanging in the air, and it would come to define how both women were remembered after that night. The dust hadn't settled, but the contrast was already clear. Candace Owens went into full reaction mode. She did what she always did when backed into a corner, took to social media, released a podcast episode that same night, and fired off a series of tweets designed to flip the narrative. She called Jasmine's comments political theater, accused the network of setting her up, and warned her followers that truth is now considered dangerous by the left. But this time, something was different. The responses weren't falling in line the way they usually did. Her base was still loud, still loyal, but quieter than usual, as if even they knew she hadn't walked away with the win. More importantly, people outside her usual orbit weren't buying the spin. On the other side, Jasmine Crockett didn't do a press tour. She didn't do 5 interviews. She didn't tweet in all caps or retweet every compliment. She posted one photo, her sitting in the studio chair, hands calmly folded, and wrote just 4 words beneath it. "Hold your truth steady. No hashtags, no jabs, just the same poise she'd carried through the entire debate. It sent a different message, one that stuck longer than noise. People began sharing it with captions like, "Strength isn't volume," and "The grown-up in the room." She wasn't trying to dominate the internet, and that's exactly why she did. There's something magnetic about someone who knows they don't need to yell to be heard, and that's what Jasmine had tapped into. A quiet kind of power. The kind that doesn't chase the mic, but is always ready when it's handed over. Meanwhile, the conversation around Candace's past was now unavoidable. People were digging. Screenshots of her 2007 complaint were circulating, quotes from the case, archived articles, old interviews. It was all resurfacing, not to shame her, but to remind the public, this happened. She said it. She lived it. So why deny it now? That was the question echoing across newsrooms and comment threads alike. If you once asked for justice, why tell others not to? For some, it wasn't even about Candace anymore. It was about the people they knew in real life. The aunt who told them to toughen up. The uncle who said racism was over. The teacher who downplayed what they heard in the hallway. Jasmine's words gave people the language to finally push back. One woman wrote in a blog post, "I grew up being told that acknowledging racism made me weak, that if I just worked harder, it would disappear." Watching Jasmine call that out without flinching felt like someone finally stood up for the 17-year-old version of me. And still, Candace kept posting, kept responding, kept trying to reframe. But her words didn't carry the same weight they once did. Not after people had seen the clip. Not after they saw someone calmly, clearly pull the mask off and leave the truth in its place. There's a difference between being loud and being remembered. Candace's brand had always been volume, provocation, going viral. But now, people were beginning to ask, what's left when the noise fades? Jasmine had offered an answer without saying it outright. Legacy isn't built in the moment. It's built in how you handle the moment. A high school debate coach in Flagstaff replayed the panel footage for her students and paused it right at the moment. Jasmine said, "I'm not trying to make you feel small. I'm trying to remind you you're bigger than this." She asked her students, "Which one of these women do you want to be when it's your turn to speak?" No one picked volume. And so, as the headlines continued and the hashtags kept rotating, one thing became more and more clear. Jasmine hadn't just won a debate. She had drawn a line in the sand between performance and principle, and the people watching, they noticed. But even with the internet buzzing and her name climbing trends, Jasmine knew the real victory wasn't in the views. It was in the quiet shift that was happening everywhere else. It's easy to get lost in moments like these, the likes, the trending hashtags, the instant reactions. But what stuck with people most after the smoke cleared wasn't Jasmine Crockett's sharp comebacks or even that viral quote. It was the way she made truth feel like something you could sit with again. In homes across the country, parents rewatched the clip with their kids, not for entertainment, but as a lesson. A father in Columbus paused it halfway and told his teenage daughter, "This is how you defend yourself without lowering yourself." A grandmother in Fresno played it on her phone and said, "She reminded me of how we used to carry ourselves, with dignity, even when we were angry." That was the part people kept talking about. Dignity. Not in a polished for TV kind of way, but in the way Jasmine kept her voice steady when someone tried to provoke her, in the way she stood her ground without needing to raise it, in the way she faced contradiction with calm, and left the crowd thinking, not shouting. Even some of Candace Owens's past supporters began having different conversations in private, not because they suddenly agreed with Jasmine on everything, but because they'd seen something they couldn't unsee, a mirror they hadn't expected, a contradiction they couldn't explain away. And quietly, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a wave or a movement. It was more like a change in temperature, slow, steady, real. A college student in Madison wrote on her blog, "I used to admire Candace's confidence, but now I realize it was volume. Jasmine showed me what actual strength looks like, when you don't panic, even when someone's trying to rattle you." People weren't just reacting, they were reflecting. That was the difference. Because what Jasmine did on that stage wasn't just correct someone. She reminded people that holding your truth isn't weakness, that speaking calmly doesn't mean you don't feel the fire, and that you don't need to raise your voice to raise the bar. The lesson wasn't about Candace Owens. She was just the backdrop. The real lesson was for anyone who's ever been told to get over it, stop complaining, let it go. Jasmine said in her own way, "You're not making things up. You're not imagining it. You're not wrong for remembering what hurt. And more than that, your story still matters, even if someone else is louder." In that moment, Crockett didn't just defend her position. She defended people who never got the mic, who sat through meetings and conversations where their pain was downplayed, who heard, "Maybe they didn't mean it," more than, "I believe you." And she did it with grace, with facts, with timing, with silence, when silence was louder than anything else in the room. That's what stuck. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine's clip was still circulating, not because it was sensational, but because it resonated. People kept watching it like they were trying to memorize the feeling it gave them. That reminder, you don't have to be cruel to be clear. You don't have to match someone's volume to make your point. You just have to stand in your truth and not blink when they try to talk over it. And that is exactly what she did. As the noise faded and attention moved to the next big thing, Jasmine Crockett went back to work, back to hearings, back to town halls, back to walking through policy with the same care she walked through that debate. She didn't need to capitalize on the moment, because the moment had already done what it needed to do. It reminded people what courage looks like when it's quiet, clear, and rooted in truth. And in the end, that was bigger than any headline. If this moment reminded you of something you've lived or gave you the words to finally speak it, share this story. Don't let the truth go quiet again. Subscribe, stay sharp, and never forget, clarity wins where noise fades.